Reserving the right to object.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Madam President, thank you. So let me clarify what this motion is. This motion today is to ask for unanimous consent of all 100 senators to be able to move a nominee through the process. A nominee that, when she came through the Foreign Relations Committee, every single Republican opposed. Every one of them. It seems the frustration here doesn't seem to be with Republicans, it seems to be with the Democratic leader, quite frankly. This nominee was brought to the committee last year and then was voted out of the committee in July of this year, but has never been brought to the floor for a vote. Never. Instead, it's been try to do a unanimous consent when my colleagues full well know that every single Republican on the Foreign Relations Committee opposes this nominee. And now the request is, now that you opposed her in committee, now consent on the floor to be able to support. That's not going to happen, obviously. Now, we've not blocked a vote. If the Democratic leader wants to be able to bring this nominee to a vote, he's had plenty of opportunity to be able to do that and still has opportunity to be able to do that. No one's inhibiting a vote on the floor. What we oppose is what's being pushed onto us to say, now unanimously consent to someone you know you don't agree to in the first place. It has also been interesting on this conversation to say, this nominee has nothing to do with reproductive rights, has nothing to do with it. I've heard that from my colleagues. It's fascinating to me that Planned Parenthood put out a statement in strong support of this nominee and specifically stated in their release, because she'll speak out on reproductive rights for women globally. So either Planned Parenthood is not telling the truth or something else. So it is interesting when we get into this dialogue to say, okay, let's just have the vote on it and allow everyone to be able to speak out. We have a disagreement on this nominee, but it is the right of the Democratic leader to be able to bring who he chooses to the floor for a vote of any time. But I would say, as one Republican of many, please don't ask me to unanimously consent to someone that we have a philosophical difference with. So with that, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President, might I, in response to my colleague, might I modify my request? Because certainly someone should have the right to vote no if they want to vote no. So let me modify my request. I would ask unanimous consent that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee be discharged and that the Senate proceed to the following nomination, PN 1578, Geeta Rao Gupta to be Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues, and that the Senate vote on the nomination at a time to be determined by Senate leadership.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from Oklahoma.
I would say to my colleague that obviously I'm not in the position to be able to make a decision for all of my colleagues at this moment, whether that's unacceptable. That's something we should discuss with the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee and with the Republican leader and allow our conference to be able to have that dialogue if that's an acceptable thing. And so at this point, I would object, just saying I'm not in a position because I'm not going to try to speak for the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee who voted unanimously in opposition to this nominee.
Madam President.
Objection is heard. Senator from New Hampshire.
Will my colleague yield for a question?
Absolutely.
I think perhaps I wasn't clear, because when I said I didn't talk about Dr. Gupta's position on reproductive rights for women. I talked about the role of the Office of Global Women's Issues. When I supported Kelly Currie, who was nominated by President Trump to be the head of the Office of Global Women's Issues, I didn't ask what her position was on choice. I asked her what she was going to do if she took that role. And she had an excellent history of working on issues that matter to women and foreign policy. And because that's not the agency that's charged with women's reproductive health in our government, I didn't think that should be the basis on which I judged whether she was the appropriate person to take over that role. And sadly, what seems to have happened is that because Dr. Gupta personally says she is pro-choice, all of the anti-choice organizations have made her nomination an issue. So I would ask my colleague Have you sat down with Dr. Gupta? Have you asked her what she would do in her role if she's approved to be the head of global women's issues, and whether that was something that she was going to talk about or work on?
If I may respond to my colleague as well.
Senator from Oklahoma.
In a colloquy in the conversation. Actually, I have not actually. The members of the Foreign Relations Committee, as you served faithfully in that role on that, that's not a committee that I serve on, but I do know all the members that are Republican members of the committee. I've had the opportunity to be able to either sit down with her personally or to be able to go through all of those notes. I know how she came through the committee without any Republican support at all, and I know the different statements that have been put out, both by Planned Parenthood and very strong statement in support of her, specifically on the issues of women's reproductive rights. That seems to say at least somebody is saying this role is going to take on that issue, but that's not a committee that I currently serve on, but I do know those well that do.
I would just say to my colleague, having sat through those hearings, which my recollection is only 1 or 2 Republicans on the committee showed up, and that most of the people who I talked to had not actually talked to Dr. Gupta, didn't actually know what the Office of Global Women's Issues does, and it's very disappointing that they're going to make a decision based on a press release from Planned Parenthood, as opposed to looking at what she would actually do in that role and the responsibilities of that office. So you guys think that every time you see women in the title, as I said, we're talking about reproductive rights. That is not the case. There's a lot that women do besides having babies. I yield the floor.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Madam President, I would affirm again as a husband and as a dad of 2 daughters and as someone who's very passionate about global women's issues as well, I am fully aware that women do a lot more than have babies, regardless of Health and Human Services currently using the term birthing people and menstruating persons, which again I find offensive in the process as well, that this is a group of people, half the population of the earth, that's made tremendous contributions, including in my own life and my own family. I would simply just ask the question, this is not a nominee that we're going to give unanimous support to, but I'm unsure why the Democratic leader hasn't scheduled this vote now for months on the floor when there's been months that we've been in session, but it's yet to be scheduled for a vote.